Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice break. We will now proceed to the session 1B, which is the expert panel discussion. I will moderate this session, and our panelists we're very lucky to have our three panelists here with us today. Maniam from MCI. We also have Chee, who is Deputy Chief Editor at Today Media Corp, and also Kruger, who's a director at First Draft News. So thank you all for making the time to be on this panel and for reading the report as well. So I'll let you begin. I guess we can go in order as was stated in the program. We'll start with Aaron, followed by Chee, and then Anne after.
Sure. Shall I just get going, Catherine?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Cool. Thanks so much to you and to the CTIC team for inviting me today. I'm always happy to be part of discussions like this. And I think it's really worthwhile work that's happening. So thank you very much for embarking on this pilot. I kind of have 5 broad things I wanted to share about the study, and then I'll go through those. It was 6 originally, but I got my question into you and Carol earlier, so now it's become 5. But I wanted to start by saying something quick about games. I know you didn't find statistically significant results in this case, but I'm glad that you're looking at game design as one potential intervention that might work here. I agree with Alex's comments about how you can make the distinction between the treatment and control groups even more precise and sharp. And I do think that games as a general tool can be quite useful. You and I have chatted about this before, right? Just in terms of the immersiveness and the experiential nature that they provide compared to other forms of intervention, which might be a lot thinner in terms of the overall experience that is actually afforded to individuals. So I love that work is being done, and I think we should persist with it a little bit. So let me make 5 broad points that struck me as I read the report and struck me again as I heard your presentation today. The first is on the importance of this pre-bunking set of interventions that you mentioned. I think in government, very often we think a lot about regulation, and we've got tools that allow us to respond in legal ways, through things like our Fake News Act, for instance. And there's a lot of work on debunking, but we don't always think enough, I think, about the broader societal literacy and levels of knowledge and awareness that the society might need. So I think it's really useful that you're looking at that. Grace is on the call here. She's from our digital readiness and learning division. So we do have a section of MCI that's actually looking at not just the regulatory powers, but also this broader awareness, literacy, capacities, capabilities, dispositions that we need our citizens to have in order to deal with a world where fake news is far more prevalent than before. This is hard work, right? Because it's a lot easier to do a regulation and put it in place. Trying to change mindsets, build up capabilities is a lot more difficult. It starts in the classroom and it never really ends. But I think it is important work. So it's really useful that you and the team are thinking about how we go about doing that kind of work. So that's point number 1, which I thought was an important thing to start with. The second point really about the game itself, right, is I was very struck by not just the fact that you said you didn't have statistically significant results in this case, but also that, in other instances, especially where topics were more long range, like migration or climate change in other settings, those actually were situations where we found more statistically significant findings. I think this is interesting for us in Singapore, partly because the priming levels on something like COVID-19. So, your study was not just about fake news in general, right? It was COVID-19 fake news. And that's kind of just in our face all the time. I mean, all of us are COVID-19 out at the moment. I don't know about you, but I certainly am, right? And I wonder if some of that priming can also be seen as part of the reason for the results that you had, right? This immensely high level of awareness. I think if you combine something like that broad priming with the selection bias issues that both you and Carol alluded to, I think that might go quite some way to explain why exactly the findings were the way they were. So I think, and we therefore, as we think about, other kinds of fake news, might there well be other kinds of findings that we also come to, right? If it's not on an issue that is so front and center in our mind share, and is not so dominant, I guess, a part of the daily narrative. Okay, so that was point number 2. The third thing I wanted to mention was this issue of the type of deception techniques that is used. I found that really quite fascinating. And your finding around the role of impersonation versus the other 4, right? Emotional content, polarization, conspiracy, and discrediting. I found that quite interesting. I'd like to dig deeper into that, right? And see whether that's replicated across other studies. Because once we know what types of intervention, once we know what types of deception there are, I think that the fact is that policy responses can be calibrated in a much sharper and more precise way. So the 2 things I wanted to mention about deception techniques were, one, if I take your face value and see that impersonation is indeed as key as you suggest, that's actually very worrying for me, because that's one of the hardest types of fakes to respond to, right? When it comes to things like content or polarization, there are ways in which, in a sense, setting the record straight can help. It's much harder with impersonation, especially with the potential for deep fakes these days. I'm wondering if I take something like your findings and put it together with the fact that I might be able to create a talking head one day that isn't even that person doing any talking. That frightens me, right? There was a video of the Singapore cabinet going around 2 weeks ago, kind of superimposing their faces onto superheroes, right? So I forget who was who. I remember my minister was Wonder Woman, and a very credible Wonder Woman she was too. And then someone else sent me a separate video made privately that was my face on Superman's body. Very frightening, actually, when you look at this stuff. But it was so convincing. And what I'm wondering is, if we can take impersonation beyond the world of text and start putting it into the world of deepfake videos, then actually it becomes even harder, right, to whether it's debunk or prebunk this sort of falsehood. And I worry about that greatly, because I think I don't know how we would do any debunking in that sort of instance, apart from just saying, well, this isn't true. But the stuff is already going to have gone viral. So the prebunking becomes actually much more important in that sort of instance, to have people know and have the literacy and discernment to be able to say, yeah, actually, this is not something I think I'm going to believe because it looks like it might be fake. So I think that's important. And then another smaller point on the deception techniques is you tended to talk a lot about the 5 as separate categories, right? What happens when they occur together, right? What happens when there is an impersonation that does polarization and also discredits its opponents? Are we looking at some kind of cumulative causation here? Does the composite fake become more powerful in an exponential way, or is it just the case that these effects work in more directions? I don't know what the answer is, but I'm curious what that is, because I think that would affect, again, the kind of responses and policy steps that we in government, but also broader society, right, would need to take. So that was point number 3. Just a couple of other quick points that I think are worth mentioning. Your 4th point was you mentioned trust in government, right, and the extremely high levels of it that existed, and this, of course, and then separately you mentioned trust in major institutions like MediaCorp and SPH. I was wondering, especially on the government end, is this high trust in government potentially too much trust in government? So if we trust that much, then do people actually become less incentivized or less likely, less inclined to undertake steps to make themselves a bit more literate? Because when you look at it, this is actually really hard work, right? To constantly try and keep on the outer cusp of trends and developments, and to make sure that we are abreast and au fait with the ways in which the world might be trying to trick us. That's really hard work. I wonder if it's easier to just kind of outsource some of that and say, okay, government, please take care of this for me. Send me messages in WhatsApp to let me know if there was a fake going around, and then I'll worry about it. But other than that, I may not undertake that much. So this, again, I think when it comes to building up long-term digital readiness and literacy, that becomes worrying for me, right? Because if trust translates into reliance, right, I think that reduces the amount of self-reflection that is actually necessary for a world where fakeries are so much more rampant. One other way to think about this is, if the government is so well trusted, almost in this paternal sort of way, right, or parental sort of way, then does that mean that the citizenry ends up being a bit more infantilized? I worry about this a great deal, because I think an infantilized citizenry serves nobody its purpose, right? And we need much greater maturity and literacy and a kind of healthy skepticism in the overall dispositions that people bring to their consumption of news and information. Last point, I just wanted to say something about vaccines, where again, you mentioned some kind of correlation between age and attitude towards vaccines, and the general preference for older folks to delay their vaccines, as well as the kind of questioning, right, about the safety that vaccines might have. I was just going to mention, I wonder how much of that would be different if you ran your survey today, because there's been a huge amount of public education. And again, right, this is a framing problem, or in a sense, a priming problem, because I would say the base of information has changed now compared to even 3 or 4 months ago, because of the phase 2 heightened alert, because of the new clusters, because of the effects of the Delta variant. I mean, this is not exogenous anymore. The government has made huge steps, right, to educate people about vaccines, to the extent of, I don't know how many of you have heard these, but there are trucks going around the older estates in Singapore, kind of encouraging people to go for vaccination, because we know that some of the older folks who we need to encourage are not going to be out there on social media. So I mentioned this only because I think this does make your life as researchers harder, right? Because the base situation is always changing. People's priors are always changing. And I think there's going to therefore be a certain amount of difficulty in disentangling the effects of interventions versus the broader information environment and climate that's out there. But I did think this vaccine point is interesting because where we are in COVID-19 at the moment, I suspect is a situation where there will always be changes every 3 to 4 months in the information environment. And how we disentangle those from other interventions is going to be really interesting for us. So those are my 5 kind of musings derived over the National Day break when I actually had time to read a longish report, and I was very grateful for that. So thank you again to the team and to all of you who put the research together.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I don't know, I guess we'll just continue with Chee Kong followed by Anne, and then I'll provide some responses after that. Chee Kong?
Thank you, Catherine. Likewise, very grateful to be here. Thank you for having me here. Although I think the panel is a bit wrongly named. I mean, for me, I'm certainly no expert. I think the experts are you guys. So I'm just commenting in my capacity as a media practitioner. Some of the findings that I was quite interested in, which I thought validated a lot of the real life observations and real life experiences that we in the media deal with day to day. So in particular, I think Aaron mentioned some of these points. Likewise, I was drawn to the finding of complacency among millennials who feel that they are less susceptible to fake news. And also how during the gameplay, they didn't bother to fact check. So for us, as some of you may know, our target audience is millennials. So we do take a particular interest in this segment of the population. But broadly speaking, I think this complacency is very dangerous. Especially when we're talking about a generation that is or has been taught and encouraged to search for their own conclusions, to draw their own findings, instead of being told what is right, what is wrong. So for this generation who are actively looking for alternative views, to mistakenly think that they are impervious to fake news is very dangerous. And also they have a tendency to lap up content disguised with creativity and humor, as the study pointed out, without being aware of the insidious effects. So I think many of us, even those of us with children or with younger friends, you find a lot of this content being circulated, and when you confront them about it, when you tell them that this is not true, they just tend to laugh it off and just think that it's harmless, without being aware that over time, insidious effects of such content. So I think compared to the earlier generation, this millennials, the group of millennials are also very comfortable with navigating in a group of gray. So what do these findings tell us about the way media literacy is taught in schools? I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a firm conclusion that can be drawn. It sounds to me like it's effective in the sense that they can discern when they are in fact vigilant about it, but it's double-edged sword, as the study also pointed out, that they think that they are inoculated when in fact that complacency makes them ironically even more susceptible. And does that mean that we need to constantly remind the public, which MCI has really been doing, but this finding validates the fact that we need to constantly remind people to be vigilant, especially perhaps more so during COVID, but also during COVID, I think people have a natural tendency to be more aware about what happens when we are in so-called peacetime. Then lastly, I would also like to draw attention to this brief mention of a finding. And I must declare that obviously I have a vested interest in this, but I was quite interested in the finding of a negative association between trust in alternative media, like Mothership and Online Citizen, and trust in science. So to me, I think that is a significant finding that is worth looking into further to determine what are the more latent effects of so-called alternative media sites that chase eyeballs and play fast and loose with facts. I believe a current view among many, including in government, maybe Aaron may want to weigh in, is that unless these sites are putting out fake stories that discredit the government or are blatantly against public interest, even among the public, I think the general view is that they are harmless, and in fact, their reach is something valuable to be tapped for public comms. So how do we manage that, knowing that there are latent effects of long-term consumption of such content? And the last thing is, Aaron talked about trust in government. I would talk about trust in mainstream media. So we talk a lot about this, and likewise in terms of likewise with trust in government, it is spoken about to an extent that it's been taken for granted by some that this will always exist. That trust in mainstream media will always exist, but we all know that is not true. Well, it's heartening to know that this is one of the key defenses that people rely on against fake news. It bears repeating and rehashing that it places a lot of responsibility on mainstream media outlets to maintain the trustworthiness and quality in their content, while at the same time, we are facing competition from the alternative sites which are drawing eyeballs away through sensationalized or more exciting content that borders on falsehood or half-truths. So again, I think Aaron made a good point about we want to prevent people from being over-reliant on government and being infantilized. So to my mind, and again, I'm biased, of course, but to my mind, the solution must be a mature society with a vibrant and quality mainstream media scene, where public discourse can actually take place based on facts and in a safe environment. So then the bigger question for policymakers and also for society is, how do we build that environment? Which are the institutions that we need to reinforce so that the people can rely less on government telling them what is right and what is wrong, but have a more discerning and more controlled in the right manner, not in terms of media controls and all that. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but in a safe space and a quality where people actually debate and discuss quality and factual news with a great trust in the mainstream media that is facing revenue challenges at the same time. Yeah, so those are the points I have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chee Kong, for these really great points. Anne, I'll let you continue.
Well, thanks so much, and congratulations, Catherine, on your research, as everyone's said earlier. And I'm actually thrilled to be able to read this and be sent the report. And it's quite pertinent for me today because I had my second vaccine just this morning. So, and I was really worried that I might be rushing to get back to the conference on time, and tried to change my appointment, but that was impossible. But anyway, it all worked out fine. So it's very appropriate, the topic that we're speaking about today. But just a quick word about First Draft for those of you that might not be familiar with this. We really see it as our mission to protect communities from harmful misinformation, and we want to empower society with knowledge, understanding and tools needed to outsmart false and misleading information. So we work with partners and we collaborate a lot to conduct research projects as well as real life projects in industry. And we really see our work as a pioneering type of work and training in this area. And so we're looking at both supporting content creators as well as the public, and as well as increasingly just anyone that's called upon to provide quality information. So there's a lot of public communications campaigns and even local community groups as well, just to help the public make better informed judgments about the information that they're encountering online. I happen to have worked much of my career throughout Singapore and Hong Kong before being asked to set up the APAC Bureau for First Draft. So it's just an honour to be asked to comment on this study and your research, Dr. Catherine, and you know, at your preeminent institution at NUS, the Institute for Public Understanding of Risk. So congratulations on all the work that's being done there. The themes and findings are consistent with First Draft's vaccine content analysis research into the complexity of the vaccine information ecosystem. So we really see a cacophony of voices and narratives that coalesce to create an environment of extreme uncertainty. So we have spent quite a lot of time at the end of last year. We were doing content analysis on hundreds, thousands actually, of online posts across Facebook groups, pages, Instagram, as well as Twitter. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes explaining this, because what I'm going to do is jump straight to your concluding remarks, the report's concluding remarks, and the suggestions from your work, as I think that is really key. But first, let me just explain a little bit about our research just briefly. We actually saw two topics driving a large proportion of the current global vaccine discourse, the online discourse. So it was especially around the COVID-19 vaccine. First, the first bucket, if you like, was this political and economic motives. You know, political and economic motives of institutions as well in the vaccine development. And second, we had this safety, efficacy, necessity kind of bucket, you know, so concerns around vaccines. And our daily monitoring in social media spaces has consistently supported what we've found in this research. And the narratives, sometimes it's not like, right, here's a bot, we can see, you know, absolute disinformation. It's clear that there's, you know, a tool and tactic. Sometimes it's, well, a lot of the time, it's narratives that are a little bit more nuanced or related to mistrust in the intentions of institutions and key figures surrounding vaccines. That's what's driving a lot of the online conversation and any vaccine skepticism, as well as safety concerns. So this we've seen is compounded by complexities and vulnerabilities of the whole information ecosystem. And we touch a lot on what we call data deficits. So you've got situations where there's demand, as we've seen in a pandemic, there's great demand for information about a topic. It's, you know, that's very high, that demand, but the supply of information coming in is low, and that's getting exploited by bad actors. And it happens really fast. So, you know, your demand is there, and within minutes, if people aren't getting the information that they want, that space will be filled by, unfortunately, poor information or bad actors, or those with different agendas. Having said that, and it's already been noted, it's really interesting to note the results against an already high level of trust and ability to detect misinformation and disinformation among Singaporeans, and that doesn't surprise me. You also noted that it's important for media literacy campaigns to remain vigilant, as we've discussed. So I'm just going to point out a couple of quotes actually from your research, and you noted that while it's certainly encouraging that the younger generation is more open to and even seeking different worldviews, it also means that they are more likely to be exposed to extreme or polarizing points of view that do not encourage more inclusive and constructive dialogue. In this respect, it's important for media literacy campaigns to raise public awareness of polarizing deception techniques used by fake news actors, so that people internalize early warning signals, either by their own cognitive processing of information or by their social networks to reject such content. And then you went on to also talk about, the appeal of creativity and humor, that can represent problematic avenues as well. Not that we're trying to discourage people from, having a sense of humor, but it's all about, building up their awareness. So this leads me to the topic of prebunking. So debunking, as we've heard earlier, that's reactive. Okay, so the poor information, it's already out there, and it's spreading fast and wide. We are really focused at the moment with our work on prebunking and misinformation inoculation. So this complements your concluding remarks, which I think draws together the media literacy and also science literacy, or whatever other literacies are needed. But in particular, when we're looking at, these COVID vaccines, we're looking at a pandemic, we're going to be looking more at climate change, issues that are not going away. So media literacy, combine it with science literacy to better build public communications and support society. And I'll just quote one more quote from your summary. And this is actually from your literature review. From a risk communications perspective, the latter concern about scientific uncertainty can be gradually attenuated by transparent communication about uncertainties about the vaccines and the virus, and prompt updates to the public about new knowledge and new uncertainties. The key is not only to building trust with the public that scientists and relevant authorities are committed to their duty of care to the community. It's also a quintessential element of building the public's capacity to deal with uncertainty. And I think that is absolutely key. Because at first draft, we note that debunks just don't reach as many people as the information or disinformation. They don't spread nearly as quickly or as far as we want them to. If they do reach us, it's generally, there's a struggle to erase the misinformation that's already in our brains, or that people have been debating online. So even when we've been told that a particular piece of misinformation is false, it can still influence people's thinking, and so that's the hard task there. That doesn't mean that we don't do debunks, but I think we need more focus on more accessible inoculation techniques like prebunking and what your study was working on. So it's a process of debunking lies, yes, tactics and different sources, but before they strike. And this can actually be quick and cheap for reporters as well as fact checkers and governments to make, but it's just a slight change in our approach that we've found has been working really well at first draft. So if you show people examples of misinformation, they'll be better equipped to spot it and question it, much like vaccines are training immune responses against a virus. Knowing more about misinformation can really help people dismiss it when they see it. So your study and game can certainly be used, I think, as a future tool to show how misinformation and the whole ecosystem works, and those tactics and agents of disinformation are really important to understand. But there's still more in the process to help build the media literacy. And I think it needs to be done in conjunction with building science literacy. So a good prebunk will address people's concerns, it speaks to their lived experience, and it really compels them to share that knowledge. That is what is empowering. So the whole point is about building trust with an audience instead of correcting the facts as you go. But we've done a lot of work with scientists, and as the report, as your study reflects, it's really important to understand how science works. So scientists take a more measured approach, and as more results come in, this can be updated or nuanced. And that's okay. But of course, this can be at odds with the rush for information that people have, or, you know, the panic for information, or headlines in certain media. People want answers straight away, which is understandable in a pandemic. People have legitimate questions too, and, you know, it's fine for them to have questions. You know, we're seeking certainty in uncertain times. But I think the ideal pre-bunk combines the fact and the logic so people can understand the facts, but also be able to attempt to spot any attempts to distort those facts when things are not quite right, and take advantage of the situation. And with that, media literacy and just a better understanding of science and that open communication that's coming through, I think that combined is what can be really empowering for society. And again, you know, it's about being vigilant with that. So again, congratulations. The research supports what a high level of media literacy can do to benefit society, and how further research and projects to combine this with science literacy and pre-bunking should absolutely be encouraged.